And thank you forwards also for inviting me to join this very interesting symposium. A special thank really goes to you, Dr. Thompson, and your team for the perfect organization of such a complex online event. So the goal of my talk is to discuss the relationship between awe and creativity, discuss the relationship between awe and creativity, and share some preliminary findings on our recent research on this potential link. So I'm pretty sure that you have had the chance to learn a lot about the meaning of awe. So I will limit myself to remind you the key concepts. So essentially, awe is a complex and somehow transformative emotion, which is often associated with some of the most defining moments in our lives. As you know, most current research on awe is based on the reference model of Dake Kertner and Jonathan Haidt. According to this model, there are two core appraisals of these emotions, which are vastness and need for accommodation. More specifically, they suggest that awe is an emotional response to vast perceptual stimuli that update our cognitive framework because they really challenge our existing mental schema. So in terms of psychological effects, studies have found that, for example, this emotion can create a diminished sense of self, which is an effect known as the small self, which in turn increases feelings of connectedness, critical thinking, positive mood, decreased materialism, and so forth and so on. I think that you have learned a lot about these kind of effects during the last sessions. So at this point, I assume that you have a clear idea of what is awe, and therefore I would like to introduce the concept of creativity, which probably has been less discussed in this symposium so far. So creativity is a very important cognitive ability, and contrary to what most people think about creativity, this ability is not confined to artistic domains, for example, literature, performing arts, music, and similar. But it also occurs in fields such as manufacturing, business, medicine, education, and of course, police operations and first emergency responses and services also benefit from creativity thinking. So actually, the products of creativity are not limited to tangible objects such as artworks, music, books, machines, or technological devices. The creativity products go beyond these examples and encompass ideas, processes, services, and systems of operations. So creativity involves doing these things in ways that are, on the one hand, novel, and on the other hand, effective in achieving a desired result. Thus, creativity can be generally defined as the production of something which is perceived as original and valuable by other people. So probably you have never thought about the link between awe and creativity so far. However, previous research suggests that the connections between these concepts are stronger than one might expect. So, for example, openness to experience, which is one of the strongest and most consistent personality traits that predicts creativity achievement, also predicts feeling of awe in a given situation. And also, awe can extend the people's mental frames, and by expanding people's mental frames, awe could also help them finding new connections among objects or ideas. Creative thinking is the ability to recombine ideas and to find new relationships between ideas. So this is akin to all cognitive components and uncommon and unexpected experiences in which people feel actively involved. So what we in psychological terms call diversifying experiences, they could enhance the ability of finding new links among ideas. And also, previous research has demonstrated that ambivalent and ambiguous emotional states like awe can be conducive to creativity. So this emotion, awe, is an ambiguous emotion that therefore could enhance creativity. But do we have evidence that actually awe is able to enhance creativity? We set to investigate if inducing this emotion could stimulate creative thinking, and to this end, we used 3D videos to induce feelings of awe. As you might have learned from other presentations today, virtual reality has proved to be an effective medium for inducing this emotion. And so in the last few years, I and Alice Chirico, we have carried out some studies to test the potential of VR as awe-inducing technology. And to this end, we designed some immersive virtual environments to induce feelings of perceptual vastness. And we found that these immersive spaces were able to induce intensive feelings of awe in the lab. But in this specific experiment, our main goal was to test if the two key appraisals of awe, which are vastness and need for accommodation, could improve participants' creativity performance. Our sample included some 50 adults who were recruited at Cattolica University of Milan. And in this experiment, we exposed these participants to two different virtual reality environments. The first virtual environment was an awe-inducing content, so a panoramic view of tall trees, sequoias actually. And the second video displayed a neutral content. There were some chickens wandering. Here, what we mean by neutral videos, we mean that the video of the chickens were not associated to a specific emotion by participants. So it was used as a controlled condition, So after watching each video, participants were required to complete 2 verbal subtests of the Torrance creativity test, which is a standard test used to test creativity thinking. Specifically, we use the product improvement and the unusual uses, which require the respondent to think of improvements for a toy and imagine all the possible uses for an object. And next, these verbal subtests were scored on the basis of fluency, flexibility, and originality, which are the 3 core dimensions of creative thinking. So did the awe experience video induce higher creativity levels than the neutral one? To address this question, as I said, we compared awe versus neutral videos, creativity levels for each of the creativity dimensions, so fluency, flexibility, originality, elaboration. And we test this in each subtest, so product improvement and unusual use. And findings showed that all experience-wide videos actually induce significantly higher levels of fluency, flexibility, originality, and elaboration in product improvement subtest compared to the neutral videos. And the same dimensions of creativity were found also higher in the unusual uses subtest compared with the neutral video. So these findings could support a more integrative approach towards the analysis of the relationship between creativity and emotions, actually, they suggest the existence of a causal link between awe and creativity. Of course, like every study, our experiment has some limitations in the sense that only a neutral and always feeling content were considered and compared. So it could be also relevant to compare, for example, all contents with stimuli conveying positive or negative emotions. And also the sample size was not big, so it is worth repeating this study. In summary, these findings suggest that some components of creativity like fluidity, flexibility, and elaboration can be positively affected by awe-inducing virtual reality experiences. But what are the implications of the relationship between awe and creativity for people operating, for example, in emergency situations? Well, of course, being creative in thinking is key for managing emergency situations. And the ability to quickly assess situation, identify the elements as they emerge and their significance, they are key skills for operators and respondents. For these reasons, I think that it is a good idea to integrate creativity training in emergency and crisis management personnel. And more generally speaking, cultivating awe in life is an important way to build enduring psychological resources and, as Jeff said, to increase resilience. So I think that these skills are demanded and cultivating awe could be a way to enhance these skills. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andrea. And let's first consider and think of and building on some of those previous sessions of, I'd like to think, like you mentioned in the photo you're showing there as well, it's VR is being used in other capacities to learn how to expand our knowledge and our ability to utilize it. So thank you for sharing it. It's just, yet again, it's not just going to the Grand Canyon. It's just not going up to where Patrick lives up in Sweden trying to experience the Northern Lights. It's there in our everyday moments, and it's there if we allow it to be. So Sheila, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, Dr. Thompson. And I just, again, want to say I also just genuinely appreciate the opportunity to be here and share some of the work that I'm doing in this area, but also see the amazing comments in the chat about how this applies in the real world. So I should say a little bit about myself. I'm a developmental researcher. So basically that means I study infants and children, and I study how they learn from their environments. And awe became this just very interesting this concept when you look at the connection to learning that we just heard about, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. But also, I live in an amazing city. And if you can't tell from that picture, and that city is Chicago. And so I'm going to be talking specifically about the institutions that are available in the city of Chicago, but also the point being that these institutions should be readily available in many major cities, but that you can, other people have hit on this, you can experience awe in a lot of different ways, right? And since I'm going to be talking about the city of Chicago, I do have to give a shout out to the fact that I am a Jersey girl, and I'm not going to get into the battle about which pizza is better, but I imagine that most people know where my Jersey heart really lies.
Sheila, you know I'm jumping in just for a brief moment. We can debate that if we have time later. I can't believe you threw that in. Please continue with your presentation.
Not going to get into it, but I come from an amazing place, and I'm just not going to do it. So I'm not going to, you guys have already heard a lot of this. The connection of awe and learning, you've literally just heard about this in the previous presentation, so I get to go through this pretty quickly, actually. Awe promotes critical thinking. We've seen a lot of research in the past day and a half that supports that, so I'm not going to delve into that. But also this need for accommodation. I love that phrase. The idea is that experiences that induce awe are going to motivate us to learn more about that experience, to make sense of it, to accommodate. That's what that phrase actually means when I think about what accommodation is. It's learning. Right? You're in this moment where something is big and wondrous and you're really feeling awe, and what your brain is trying to do is figure out what's going on, right? And science institutions, cultural institutions are built, they're designed to maximize that opportunity. So awe is proposed as a catalyst for science learning, among other types of learning. We're going to focus on the Science Museum here today with my research, but we'll talk about some other areas. We know that awe is really great for these positive things. And again, as a developmental psychologist, I'm interested in learning. So awe and learning is really where it would drag me out of my infant and child development area, but also into this real world, like how you experience awe in your environment as you're moving around. And so as a developmental psychologist, the way that I do research is actually looking at how attention is distributed. Infants have very few verbal abilities. They're not going to answer a survey about their experiences, but we can measure where they pay attention and how they pay attention and what things draw their attention and what things distract them from what important features. And so I use a method called eye tracking, which is basically a computer design that allows me to see where infants are fixating or paying attention to things. One of the innovations in technology has been that this has moved into a mobile unit. So there's something called eye tracking glasses. They're made by Tobii in Sweden. So shout out to Sweden. So these are the eye tracking glasses, basically. And if you saw William Krenzer's talk in one of the previous panels, this is actually him wearing them, the eye tracking glasses at the Shedd Aquarium. They're actually an amazing piece of technology. They're just glasses that are individual wears. They attach to a battery pack that clips onto your pants. And then you can walk unobtrusively through any exhibit or space. There are no wires connecting you to anyone. We can actually watch in real time as somebody's moving through an environment and see their attention on a tablet, but we don't have to be anywhere near them while we're doing this. So this piece of a technology allows us to gather data in the real world about where somebody is attending. It also picks up audio recordings of what they're talking about and gives us an idea of what their visual perspective is in the moment. So what we did in this study is we had people wear eye tracking glasses in some of the really great cultural institutions in Chicago. So I have to give a shout out to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, the Lincoln Park Zoo, which is an amazing free zoo sitting in the heart of Chicago. So that's an incredible resource in your city if you have free institutions like this, like the Smithsonian's in Washington, D.C., for example. And then the Shedd Aquarium, which if you know, Chicago is sitting right in Navy Pier, just in this wonderful location. So they all let us come in and collect data with guests as they were experiencing a normal day at their cultural institution and science institution in their city. So to touch on how we measured awe, we had guests wear eye tracking glasses, and at the end of their visit experience, in certain exhibits that we chose specifically for features that might induce awe, we had them fill out something called the situational awe scale, which William Krenzer talked about in a previous talk. But just to highlight here, these are the 4 facets of the situational awe scale. And to say very quickly, the idea here is not to look at whether you have a tendency as a person to experience awe or not, but to look at whether the situation you are in invoked a feeling of awe. So what's nice about this is it's not really a personality trait so much, the scale. It's measuring whether you were influenced by your experience. And the 4 features we'll be focusing on is that connection with other people, the liberation and connection. Physiological awe, which is whether you felt chills or your heart started racing, whether you got goosebumps when you saw something. That small self in a vast world, really, really important, right? And then that's dark awe that people have been sort of hinting at, this oppressive or isolating feeling that you might feel when something is so vast that you feel very, very sort of overwhelmed by it. So these are the measures that we gave people at the end of their exhibit experience. To talk really quickly at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, we picked 2 exhibit spaces specifically for features that might invoke different types of awe. So we picked the rotunda at the Museum of Science and Industry. What happens when you come in is you go down a series of staircases, and then you buy your tickets, and then you go up an escalator and you walk into this giant, beautiful rotunda that leads you into the Museum of Science and Industry. And basically it's designed to be vast, beautiful, hopeful. It has this quote sitting at the top of the rotunda: science discerns the laws of nature, industry applies it to the needs of man, right? So it really just draws you into this like, whoa moment as you're coming into the museum. And we had people wear eye tracking glasses as they experienced that and fill out the surveys. And we compared them to other people who went into the U-505 exhibit, which is a German U-boat that is sitting in the Museum of Science and Industry. It's a giant boat. And to get to that boat, you go down a dark tunnel where there are gunshot soundtracks and the floor rattles and bombs are going off and you're hearing soundtracks of what basically sounds like wartime. And then you come around the corner and see this giant boat. So the exhibit is basically designed to be dark. It's pointing out the historical significance during war. And it's oppressive when you're going through that dark tunnel to sort of this open, vast space. So we wanted to compare how you feel in those two exhibit spaces. So let me show you a little bit about what eye tracking gives us. You should see a static image right now. There's a red circle. That's where a participant who's wearing the glasses is looking. And I'm just going to hit play, so hopefully you guys can see this. So hopefully you all saw that. That is a 17-year-old participant who comes around the corner. He sees the U-boat and says, epic. And then he says, I wish I could get on that. So, of course. And we can take that data from his experience and we can compare it to all the other participants we had in our study and look at what features of this exhibit they paid attention to, and then link that to their awe scores. And so the way we do that is every single person wearing these glasses has a different experience, right? They can walk through the exhibit freely. They can pay attention to different things. We gave them no instruction. And then we take all of their data and we put it on a single still image. And that way we can basically map their experience across the exhibit space. So this is a long ways picture of the U-boat. What you're seeing is just a ton of dots. These are 15 participants' data. Each dot is a different color. Each color represents a different participant. So the green dot is one participant, the purple dot is another, the red is another. And each of those dots is a fixation or a length of time that they looked at something. And so this looks like a lot of data, and we can look at all of the patterns of this data in a number of different ways, but I can show you in a really nice summary where people spent their time. They really looked at the nose of that ship when they came around. There's a spot where you stop and really admire the vastness of the ship and you focus on the tip of it. The torpedoes got a lot of attention. And then that top, I believe it's called a fin of the ship is really where attention is drawn. And we were surprised that how this attention seemed to be drawn to this back place. That's where people tend to dwell. They spend a lot of time looking at that part of the ship. And so what became really, really interesting to us is why, you have this vast space, what draws your attention and why. And so what we started looking at was, you can see in the front of this picture, there are signs, and the signs provide information about what you're looking at, right? So if you're experiencing this awe, do you go and search for information to explain that experience? Do you go and try and learn about what's happening? So what we did is we took the data that we were collecting and we linked it to whether you were paying attention to the information about the U-boat. So in fact, a lot of the looking back and forth at that part of the boat is because there are bullet holes in the boat. And there's a sign that explains where the bullet holes are. So people read the sign and they look back and forth to try to find that information. So we really did see this great link between experiencing something overwhelming and trying to learn about it. So in the U505, just in summary, we saw people spending somewhere between 5 and 25 minutes in that exhibit space. The more they looked at the boat, the smaller their sense of self in a vast world was. And they had a greater feeling of oppression and a weaker connection. So we did see evidence for that dark awe in this U505 exhibit space. When we compared it to the rotunda space, where guests spent about 1 to 4 minutes, remember, it's like the entryway to the museum, so very little time there. The more guests looked up at the ceiling, the more we saw a greater sense of connectedness, smaller sense of self again, and just generally a more positive sense of awe in these spaces. So that was the Museum of Science and Industry. We have recently extended this work to looking at the Lincoln Park Zoo, and we again picked 2 places, one that's very bright and airy. If you've ever been in the Regenstein Center for African Apes in the Lincoln Park Zoo, it's a beautiful building. Gorillas and chimpanzees have lots of space and lots of light. And we compared it to the Helen Brock Primate House, which is an older building, in one of the oldest actually in the Lincoln Park Zoo exhibit space. So does not have all the natural light features. Again, here we found lots of attention to signs. I'm not going to go over videos because I don't want to go over time, but we did see that the more you felt a smaller sense of self, the more you anthropomorphized the animals, which is basically the more you gave them human-like traits, the more connected to them you felt. And in fact, when you were in that Center for African Apes, you did see greater sense, a smaller sense of self in the vast world, and lower oppression and isolation. So I think we've hit on a lot of different ways the way buildings are designed can influence your awe. And again, these cultural institutions are really designed to invoke awe. I see Jeff coming back, so I wonder if I'm out of time. I do want to just say really, really quickly, I was going to show, we have eye-tracked animals as people are looking at them. It's a much more difficult target than the U505. And then to basically end on the application to the real world, humans have a bias to pay attention to negative information. This is evident in our attention. We pay attention to threat. That's high. Negative emotions, threatening, dangerous situations. First responders are particularly trained to look for risk and to assess it very quickly. And this is, evolutionarily valid. We should be. We want to survive, right? You have to also then take yourself out of that place, I think, and look for the positivity. That's what this conference is really sort of emphasized. Is museums, zoos, there are places, aquariums that are built to sort of invoke these positive emotions. And my argument for attention is that you should really just be in the moment and attend to those moments when you can. So I couldn't do this without a lot of people helping me. And I did, again, as a developmental researcher, want to hit back on the fact that there are moments in my life, it's hard to find awe. I can't always go to a museum. And in fact, going to a museum with small children can be very difficult and stressful. But I get my little hit of awe when my kid learns something new. So this is a picture of my daughter seeing a duck. Now, Chicago is a city. We don't have a lot of ducks, right? And it's a duck. It's like a glorified pigeon. But for my daughter, that duck was amazing. And she was so excited, and it was all she could, she was duck, duck, duck. So watching a kid learn is also a way for you to experience awe. You just have to find it in the opportunities that you have. That's it. Thank you to everyone.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sheila. Really, really fascinating. And I like how it truly added on to what Dr. William Krenzer spoke about earlier, and digging that deeper level with the eye tracking and the heat maps and everything. Really fascinating.
So this is my first big talk ever, and I can't believe the first thing I'm going to say is New York pizza, no contest. But with that being out there now, I want to talk a little bit about this aspect of awe that we is largely missing, but also so obvious when you think about it. So this study was done by David Yaden and I, who David spoke earlier today, in 2019, and we were really interested in this question of, we know awe happens out in the mountain peaks. If we look at images of space, if we look at tall buildings, and if we listen to expansive music, but can it happen close to home? Can it happen in our everyday experiences? I know I've had these experiences where the people I love just become bigger, vaster, and change the way I see them. So is this a thing, or is it just me? So that's really where this study came from. And I'll just give you the big picture right away, right at the beginning. So the people in your life have the potential to elicit awe. These awe experiences you have with them can enrich your social support. And social support is key and crucial to building resilience. So that's the takeaway. You can leave now. That's pretty much the whole thing.
No, she's just kidding, everybody. Stick around, because that should be what has them to stick around, Marianna. So please keep going and nobody go anywhere.
Yes, just kidding. You stay, please stay. But what this paper explored was this first claim. Do the people in your life actually have the ability to elicit awe? And then the second part are things I've kind of learned along the way as a member of a gigantic support system. So I'm a member of a very large Italian-American family, so I see everything through the lens of relation. Okay, so how do we do this? We had 636 participants, and we randomly assigned them to one of 3 writing tasks. So we know from past research that asking people to write about an experience of awe can actually induce awe in the moment while they're writing. So the 3 conditions we had in our study were: write about a time you experienced awe in nature, write about an interpersonal experience of awe, so that's my niece, inspired this whole research program, and then write about a time you just felt happy or content. And this is that active control condition. We want to make sure what we're capturing is awe and not just general positivity. So after randomly assigning participants to one of these 3 writing task conditions, we asked them to fill out the awe experience scale. And this scale breaks down awe into these components that you probably heard so much about throughout this whole symposium, but the 2 necessary conditions, which are vastness and accommodation, also the small self, connectedness with a big C, being connected to the universe, perceptions of time being altered, and these physiological responses like goosebumps or chills. So the awe experience scale turns these experiences of awe into a number, and that allows us to compare awe across these 3 conditions. We also took those writing excerpts that people wrote in response to the 3 conditions, and we further categorized them according to these flavors of awe set forth by Keltner and Haidt. So we know awe has this vastness and accommodation component, but it also can be tinged with different flavors. So examples are threat. If you see a tornado, it's like the dark awe that we brought up. You can feel fear alongside awe, beauty, supernatural causality. So feeling like there's an entity or a force that's involved in the awe experience. Also ability, watching Gabby Douglas do things that human bodies just shouldn't do, but can also add this sense of admiration alongside an awe experience. And finally, virtue and excellence. So this is Sandra Lindsay, first person to get a vaccine in the US. And virtue and excellence tends to be when people go above and beyond the call of duty, when people act according to their values. So we can have awe experiences that have this sense of moral uplift and elevation alongside the vastness and accommodation. So what did we find? Really, really key results. It's a thing. It turns out it's a thing. If you write about an experience you had with a close loved one where they made you feel awe, it will elicit awe over and above just general positivity. Also, when we compared nature experiences to these interpersonal experiences, we found 2 key differences. The first key difference was the flavor that I kind of just talked about. This interpersonal awe experience tended to happen more in response to virtue and excellence of character. So seeing people you love go above and beyond, seeing them act according to their values. And nature was more likely to be coded for beauty. Another key difference that is important, I'm going to illustrate using some excerpts from our study. So this is an excerpt from the nature condition. So someone wrote about their experience in nature. They said, when I go see the giant trees in California, they were large and amazing. The sight of them took my breath away. I was in awe. I continually looked up with my mouth hanging open. And I'll let the awe experts that you are now becoming kind of figure out what qualities of awe are here. But I'd like to share an excerpt from the interpersonal awe condition. And this excerpt comes from a participant whose father was going with them to their brain surgery. So he hates hospitals, but he was there for the entire day for me. So where the awe comes in is that I'm amazed at the love a parent can have for a child and how it can make them able to do things they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. My dad would never willingly spend the day at the hospital, but he did it for me. And that kind of love and devotion is what makes me feel a little bit safe in this scary world. And so what we see here is this difference between things that are objectively vast, like no one will argue with you if you say the redwood trees are awe-inspiring or space is awe-inspiring. But then there's also things that are relatively vast. Like if we were in that hospital room watching this person, we might feel empathy, sympathy, probably not awe, because we don't know anything about them. But for their child who wrote this excerpt, they really saw their father go above and beyond, act virtuously, act according to his values, and it opened up their mental frame to allow for a much bigger perspective or view of their father. And we have things like this in our lives that are figuratively vast, like Sheila watching her daughter look at ducks, right? Just watching your own child have these milestones, watching your colleagues go into the line of duty for the first time, perhaps, or watching your parents age, right? Things that on the outside to others don't quite feel like they might be awe-inspiring, but because of you and your context have the ability to really elicit awe. So that is awe. And then the way I connected to resilience is in the idea of resilience as this ordinary magic. So a lot of us think of resilience as like, how do we weather the storm? How do we like make it through this hard thing? But Anne Maston, who set out to study resilience and was looking for these like superhuman qualities in people to see how they bear adversity, found that actually it's all the ordinary things that make us resilient. It's these ordinary aspects of internal things like getting enough sleep, having a good diet, but also external things like having social support, being part of a community, contributing to a community. So resilience is just as much about the conditions as it is about the conditioning. So it's just as much about creating the tools you will need to bear adversity as it is about bearing the adversity itself. And so where the awe comes in is interpersonal awe, these experiences that are relatively vast can add depth to our experiences of our close relationships and loved ones. I don't know about you, but we've been sort of trapped inside with the same people for a year in many cases, and it may have led to this very rigid, fixed perspective of who they are. And we have a real opportunity with this reopening to be able to catch the people we love in their vastness. I promise you, the people in your life are way more vast than your brain gives them credit for. We have this negativity bias, and we just have all these shortcuts that help us get through our days. So interpersonal awe is being able to attend to, be present to, and allow yourself to just watch your daughter watch a duck, right? Like at the end of the day. And so, yeah, that's the big takeaway. I guess if there's any questions, I don't know how this is organized, but that's.
I'll take it from here. Thanks, Marianna. Fantastic. Really, really great presentation from all of our researchers. And we'll segue now first before we open up to the audience. There's a lot of comments and questions in there. I will try to get as many as we can, but first, let's get some perspective and insight from our expert panelists. And the first one we'll go to is Belinda Goodwin. And just briefly again, Belinda is the Secretary for the Wellbeing Committee for the Police Federation in the United Kingdom. And I was just interested in hearing what you have to say, Belinda, from maybe a personal perspective, but also in your professional world. And if you have a question for any of our panelists, please add that in as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Thanks for the invite to this fantastic session. never heard or even thought about or before. I thought, Andrea, lovely to meet you. He's shown the impact of awe on pro-social behaviours within his presentation, which shows generosity, compassion, ethical decision-making, and shows the positive emotions as well. For me, anything that surprised me, the thing that surprised me the most, I think, was actually connecting creativity with problem solving. As a police officer myself, I've been for 20 years in the Metropolitan Police. It's something we do day in, day out around problem solving. We don't know what we're running into. We have to make quick, instant decisions, but never really thought about the creativity side of it. And looking at a lot of my colleagues, we are quite creative, a lot of us, and not really put the two together. So thank you so much for that. How can we apply this to our to policing in the UK? You know, there is a lot of talk around resilience and around what we can do to do more around that, to make officers a bit stronger, their mental health stronger, and being in a state of awe does seem to create that kind of resilience that we're looking at, and it's really good to hear that it can be applied in certain areas, certainly in, as you call it, law enforcement. We call it in the police service in England and Wales. It's really, really interesting to see and to you know, hear how we could bring that forward into the UK. So really, really keen to learn more about it. I have got one question for yourself, for Andrea. It's about how could these results that you've seen be applied in a policing context, and how do we harness that feeling of awe and actually create and bring something really positive, tangible that we can utilise within policing? Thank you.
So thank you, Belinda. Very interesting question. So I think that generally speaking, cultivating awe in life is a good way for building enduring psychological resources and especially resilience skills, as also Jeff said at the beginning of this session. I would stress the creativity. Oh, thank you. Sorry for the unstable connection. So I just wanted to conclude saying that I feel that police officers are very often exposed to situations that elicit intense negative emotions. And in this sense, they have a particularly strong need for preventing mental health problems related to this continuous exposure to distress. So I believe that it is possible for a police officer and an enforcer, like for every person on earth, to learn how to integrate more awe in their lives. And I believe that this could bring psychological benefits and help building creativity skills in the long run.
Let's jump over to Superintendent Patrick Forsman, and he's a superintendent with the Swedish police. And I'd love to just get your thoughts on this as well. Any feedback, comments, or a question for any of our presenters?
Well, I'd like to start to say you should try Swedish pizza. Otherwise, thank you for really interesting talks, and I'd like to just send an extra thanks to you, Jeff, for the opportunity for me and the Swedish police to be a part of this exciting work. I was very happy when I got to attend last year's symposium, and I learned a lot from it. As responsible for how the Swedish police works with mental illness and suicide prevention, both last and this year's symposium have given us many new ideas and new contacts around the world, which I really appreciate. Unfortunately, we in the Swedish police haven't been at the forefront of the work of strengthening the staff's resilience to own mental illness, but this is something we work hard and hope to be able to change. Just like Chief Gang said yesterday, working with and trying to understand awe is quite new to me as well. Thanks to the fact that I was lucky to participate in one of Jeff's 5 days program about Awe, combined with these fantastic talks today, I started to understand more of what it means and what strengths it really has. I think we need to be able to strengthen ourselves through Awe. And I'd like to say thank you, Sheila, for an inspiring and interesting talk. It's really interesting to hear how you combine different types of research within the same project. And I think it's super exciting how we work with the eye tracking technology and the way the technique works. And I have a question that is a little bit off topic to Sheila, but it's off topic from Awe. But do you see a possibility to use the technology and research in the line of training of police officers and other first responders? Would it, for example, be possible to see and measure the reactions and the focus you have when you are exposed to different types of impressions and situations during different types of controlled training?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I work at a medical school, and one of the extensions to my research, so I have, again, a developmental arm, but I also have this visual attention arm, is to look at whether you can train fellows to pay attention to the things they need to pay attention to during a call. Like during a call and you're running into a room and there's a lot happening, and what do you need to pay attention to? It's been great to be in meetings with these expert physicians who basically will have conversations. Well, where do you look first? Well, where do you look first? It's like, no, guys, we're going to strap some eye tracking goggles on you, and we're going to see, because what you think you're doing and what you're actually doing might not be the same. And in fact, they usually aren't, because we have this idea of controlled attention, like you're telling your attention what to do, versus your attention goes where your brain is doing a lot of work for you, right? And you're processing a lot of information very, very rapidly. And that's what the eye tracking glasses are really giving us insight to in a medical environment. So I'm sure in some of the environments that law enforcement is in and other situations, like, how did you know this was going to happen? Like, I do a lot of work on how infants can predict the future based on what they've seen in the past. The idea here is you might have learned something and your attention goes to like that doorknob or that hand or that part of the body. Like, we know athletes pay attention to certain parts of the body differently than fans do, because an athlete knows you're about to pivot and they need to adjust too, right? They make predictions. So attention is this really incredible area. And I think absolutely there's this extension for it in your field.
Yeah, I think it can be really useful in analyzing and understand your own reactions, and through that create a better mental resilience in our line of duty.
Jump to our next expert panelist, Megan Rogers, Dr. Megan Rogers, who's a postdoctoral fellow at Mount Sinai Beth Israel, and also she's the student division committee chair of the American Association of Suicidology. And I'm a member of that organization as well. And I think you're doing fantastic work on behalf of AAS. And I was just interested in any insights or thoughts that you had on anything you've heard, and if you have a question for any of our researchers.
Yeah, so thanks again for having me, Jeff. I'm really excited to be here. Really fantastic set of talks. I will also admit, like Belinda, that the phenomenon of awe was something I haven't really thought too much about before hearing some of these talks over the past couple of days. So it's been really exciting just to really see all of the fascinating research that's going on. I also have no skin in the pizza game, so I'm not going to comment there. I'm originally from North Carolina, so if you want good barbecue, just head on down south.
I went to grad school in Texas, so I'm definitely not jumping into that one because I've already gotten myself in so much trouble.
But anyway, back to awe. I was really struck by Marianna's talk, especially regarding the phenomenon of interpersonal awe. I'd never really thought about awe in the context of like nature versus interpersonal conditions versus other conditions. And it was really fascinating to me that just like the qualities and just also the subjective experiences differed kind of based on the stimuli, and just really how some of these things, especially like interpersonal, might be able to drive that resiliency. I was really struck by Marianna, your quote, kind of resilience is just as much about conditions as it is about conditioning. and just how that like social support, that feeling of belonging could be used to boost resiliency to stressors. So I'm coming at this, I'm a clinical psychologist working specifically in suicide prevention. So I was really wondering about the potential applicability of these findings to just buffering and protecting against the stressors and mental health conditions, both in patients and people who are struggling, especially within the context of the pandemic, our healthcare workers, our frontline workers, whether finding like ways to generate awe might be protective given these contexts, and just the tendency of humans in general to just attend to and perseverate on kind of more negative information. So whether, you know, maybe generating awe might be protective. But something that really surprised me, there were a couple of things. So first, I was really struck that even like writing about awe could generate feelings of awe. So that was something I wasn't expecting. And I'm wondering about like just potential uses of that and applications in some of these workforces that have high levels of stress and high levels of crises. And furthermore, that interpersonal awe wasn't really related to connectedness more general. But then kind of thinking, I was also wondering, you know, whether interpersonal awe might relate to like interpersonal connectedness. And I think Marianna really brought that home really well, and how that might be able to be leveraged in mental health treatment. So I guess my question for Marianna might be like, are there people who struggle to generate examples of awe, particularly like interpersonal awe? Like how much scaffolding is needed, especially at the outset? And, you know, for those individuals who struggle to generate examples of awe in their lives, like, do we know anything about these people? And like, what are some things that we might be able to do to boost awareness of or experience of awe?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we did get some excerpts where it was like, I've never experienced this, or I don't know how to talk about this. So I'm not sure really like whatever became of those people from the study, but I can say just from, I'm like a third year PhD candidate in a clinical psych program. I do a lot of dialectical behavior therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy, and really calibrating people around the life worth living and around values, I think opens the door and creates scaffolding to be able to have more positive emotions generally. And awe is like a special class of positive emotion. So I think if we're thinking about how do we scaffold this for people whose lives are just endless misery, I would imagine it's just building up positive, accumulating positive emotions more broadly, and then, you know, trying to facilitate them catching these experiences. I don't know that you can cultivate interpersonal awe experiences. I feel like there's something that you catch by being really present to your life and the people in your life. So building those mindfulness skills and attention. And then also, I think about therapists too, like doctors, therapists, nurses. There's a quote my supervisor gave me that I know he didn't make this up, but it comes from somewhere. But he said, if only you could view your patients as sunsets instead of problems to be fixed. And I think if we could carry that with us into these treatment settings and impart that into clients and patients, I think that would be a way to turn on this kind of awe lens. But that's my 2 cents, I guess.